Welcome to the EarthWorks podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon from many of our turf friends from the past 30 years.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us again. I'm excited about this podcast. I've got Greg Baer on from the Baer Design Group. He's an irrigation consultant, a friend of mine. And I was hoping to get him on for quite a while, and we've kind of been, our schedules haven't met up. He's been really busy this fall, which is always a good thing, and certainly something I can give him a pass on. But Greg, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
A lot of you guys will be listening just on a regular podcast. In the background is one of his many works. That's Pacific Dunes behind him, and so he's been. We'll get into this a little bit more, but he's been lucky enough to be involved with some pretty cool projects in the Western U.S. I want to find out what your reach is, so we'll talk about that here in a minute. But let's kind of get to know you a little bit. I don't know your educational background, or did you start in golf early on and you've been in it? How did you get here?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, so I went to graduating high school. I went to ITT Technical Institute. I loved drafting, computer-aided drafting specifically.
Okay.
Thought I wanted to be an architect. About halfway through our lessons, our semester, it was what was it? It was 3 semesters, so a year and a half, 2 years of training or schooling. We went through the architecture semester, and halfway through that semester, I realized I didn't want to be an architect.
Because why? Probably not the same reason I'm not an architect right now.
Well, I think part of our training in that industry was drawing details, so
Sure.
sections of walls and roofs and insulate. I don't know, it's just boring. It didn't interest me at all.
Okay.
And it was at that same time a job advertisement was posted, and David Beck was he was an irrigation consultant.
Yep.
Moving his business from Seattle to Boise, and was looking for some help for just drafting. I applied, got the job, and worked for him for 2 years. Graduated from ITT in that process. Was going to Boise State University with a focus of engineering.
So you signed up with Beck before you had even gotten your certificate or anything?
Yeah.
So okay, cool. You get good on the job training.
Well, yeah. And so working for Beck for 2 years, that I got nothing but specifically golf irrigation training. I guess we did do a couple really cool projects. Got to design the irrigation system for the Seattle Space Needle. And then Amazon was just getting popular, and they were building their world headquarters in Seattle. Got to design that irrigation system as well. So there's a couple cool high profile commercial jobs that I forgot about really until we started talking here. But he sold his business. So his wife is a pediatric neurosurgeon.
Okay.
And she was just getting into the profession. She graduated and started making some money, and he became Mr. Mom.
Love it.
And so he sold his business to a reputable, they're a landscape architecture, civil engineering, land surveying firm here in the Boise area. It's the Land Group. And I worked for them for 12 or 13 years.
Yep.
And my primary duties, responsibilities was irrigation design and to carry that golf irrigation flag. But I also got exposed to more commercial landscape irrigation, landscape design, civil engineering, surveying, and really all of it applies to what my main focus is and passion is. It's still the golf industry. And so,
but they were full service. They were
full service,
pretty much everything.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe where you and I first met. You were still with the Land Group at that time, right?
Yeah. I left there. So I think you and I met probably around, I don't know, it was before the recession, I think.
Yeah, so I got to Boise in '98, so it was sometime after that. I know we met.
It had to be around 2000, yeah.
I think
before
so.
You were still at Hillcrest.
Yeah, I was.
So yeah, I started my business in 2012.
Okay.
So we've been going for about 11 years.
And so you're specifically, or you're leaning towards golf? I mean, obviously there can be some significant ebb and flow in our industry. So will you go outside of golf?
So we do, as a business, we do some landscape architecture. It's tailing off quite a lot. My wife was carrying that flag for
I
a
didn't know
lot of
that.
years. And we've had employees along the way that help. Now that my wife, since with kids, my wife has been more of mom and CEO of the house,
Sure.
and so, we've got employees that take on the landscape side of things. I assist in some situations with clients and project management, but I'm not too involved in the landscape side of things, and less every year.
So 2012, you decide you're going to hang your own shingle.
Yeah.
What was your biggest trepidation? Were you nervous about it, or was it time?
A little of both.
I think it's
I mean,
always interesting when people decide either to break out on their own or start a new business, like what the motivation was, what your reservations were, and so
yeah,
forth.
obviously money is a big one. My
Yeah.
wife wasn't working. She used to work at the land group as well. We met at the land group.
Okay.
And then during the Great Recession, 2008, 2000, I think she made it to 2010 or somewhere around there, and then got let go.
Okay.
And so she wasn't working, and we had one child and another child on the way. And so
And you
income
got to
was
come to her
obviously
and say, I'm
the big concern.
gonna break out on my own now.
Yeah, but she had full support.
Yeah.
She was all behind me. And really, I think the biggest factor that pushed me to say you can do this was I was talking to my dad. My dad was in the architecture and engineering industry with residential construction.
Okay.
He designed trusses for buildings, but he was in the industry. He understood the industry generally. And he said, look at all the other idiots out there that are successful in making a living. If they can do it, you can do it too.
Right. Right.
And so I was like, yeah,
like
that
a
was a big
backhanded comment,
confidence.
like you're not an idiot, kid. You can do this, right?
Yeah. So that was good,
Yeah,
reassuring motivation.
sometimes we need to be nudged that way, and that's I'm glad that he was willing to do that for you. So, so you've been going since 2012.
Yeah.
How many employees? How big a company is it?
Well, right now it's just me, and I've got a gal doing landscape.
Okay.
And she's actually in Pocatello. So I'm in Boise. She's in Pocatello. The beautiful thing about COVID was
Things have
everybody was
changed.
kind of forced to learn to work remotely and do it well, just like this meeting here, the Zoom.
That's right.
Right. So it works out really well. So
good.
She takes care of all of our landscape architecture stuff, and I'm here in the Boise office. And to be honest, we've had 3 employees working for us at one time. And while I love the support and manpower, it's hard for me to release control and also communicate exactly how things need to get done, and to be patient enough for them to learn.
You've just described every golf course superintendent's feelings about employees. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, to get to scale and to grow, you've got to have people, but at the same time, sometimes they're the ones that hold you back the most. So I totally get it.
Yeah, I've come to terms with the fact that I really like kind of being a one-man band.
Right.
And I have control all the way through the project. I get done the way I expect it to get done. And so I kind of see that as the future going forward. But who knows? I had Pete Morris. Pete Morris. He and I were consultant for a while, teaming up. He was an employee of mine, but we would help each other out frequently.
Yeah.
And now he's getting close to retirement. So if I found another guy like that, I'm definitely not opposed to a relationship like that.
Well, I'm sure Kip Kalbrenner from Ridgetop. I'm sure you've worked with him plenty. And I remember when he was doing some work for me at Hillcrest, I had identified real quickly his level of talent. I mean, there's nobody for that scale of project on the renovation side that I would trust more than Kip and his team. And Casey's obviously taken over a little more of the day-to-day stuff now, but I implored him at one point when he was doing a bunker reno for us. I said, you could rule the Northwest if you could grow a little bit. He says, I'm not growing.
I know. I'm trying to get them to start an irrigation division.
Well, and I think things might have changed now with Casey more in control, but his point was, look, as soon as I put somebody else in the seat of this excavator, I don't have control anymore. And
Yeah,
I mean that
I
was
get it.
he knew his talent, and his talent was really in the seat of the equipment. I mean, the guy could run an excavator like you and I can run a spoon. I mean, it's
Yeah,
amazing to watch people when they're talented like that. But no, I get it. I get it. And as long as you're busy, um, and his other point was, if I grow, now I have to stay busy all the time to keep people employed.
yeah,
Whereas if things slow down, and this was way pre 2008, if things slow down, I can just keep chugging along. And I mean, even through COVID, I don't think there was anybody busier in the renovation work than he was, because he had everything booked out.
yeah, and they fit too.
Right.
Those smaller companies fit
Yeah.
really well through those downturns.
Yep. Exactly right. So I applaud you for maintaining your scope and your size. Okay, so let's get into the nitty gritty here. I wanted to ask some. I gave you a list of questions, and I don't think any of them are out of bounds. But um, first and foremost, since this is your field of expertise, if a turf manager, and I use that term a little more broadly, because you obviously do other things other than just golf, but if somebody's looking for a designer, um, what what do you suggest they look for? And I assume it depends on the scope of the project, but let's just take like a full renovation. Your club approves an expenditure. Obviously, they can't approve an expenditure until they've got somebody like you on board. But what, in your opinion, what scope of work should you take on, and what should he assume as the manager on site?
Oh boy, that's a good question. As far as roles and duties through this whole process, uh, they have to, superintendents know the property better than anybody, right? And so
Right.
they need to communicate all the skeletons in the closets, right?
Right.
The good, the bad, and everything in between. So it's critical for them to communicate the needs of a new irrigation system
And
and the
to draw
challenges.
that out too, right? I mean, you've
Well,
got
yeah,
to have that information.
yeah, we need to know that information to be able to customize or tailor a design to fit their needs, right?
Sure.
And so that's the biggest part of it. And as it gets into designing the plans, them reviewing the plans is very helpful.
Okay.
Um, and then you get into bidding the project, just being present when you can is good enough.
Right.
Into construction, I try not to bother a superintendent too much. I mean, I like to have them kind of keeping an eye on things. They're there daily. As a consultant, we're there, every week, every 2 weeks, depending on how fast construction's going, maybe every 3 weeks. And so
Right.
we're not there daily. And so it's good to have eyes and ears daily on the job and through your superintendent, but at the same time, they've got a job to do too.
Yeah.
And so try not to overwhelm them with their day-to-day duties, and only go to them as needed.
Okay. I like that. So on a uh I thought of a sub question to this. Okay, so let's say, and it doesn't happen a whole lot anymore, but let's say that you've got a complete, like a new build, like the one
Mhm.
behind you. You were involved with Pacific Dunes. Um, how much are you working with the other, I won't call them trades, but the other, um, the golf course architect, the contractors that are on the ground? I mean, a lot of times now they've got contracting split between, even on a renovation, you've got contracting split between the dirt work and the irrigation
Right,
work.
right.
Even if they're not split, they're different divisions of the same company. So how much overlap is there in that process, either
Oh,
before or during the process?
well, I mean, so the process in general of a new build is an architect will have, and it can come in very, very different levels of detail, but a master plan of the golf course. So
Sure.
they've toured the property, they've identified a routing plan. At a minimum, what I've seen from, like the core Crenshaw guys, they'll have their green placed, they'll have their tees placed, they'll have a routing line on there but they don't have really much other detail shown on there. They don't have fairways. They have some bunker locations, but it's very rough. Other architects are very detailed with grading plans even. And so depending on what they give us, initially, in order for a project to be priced, right? Understand what your pumping requirements are going to be, power requirements, all that stuff. We have to put together an initial design, and we just call it a master plan. And through that, we work through, make sure that that all of the golf areas are covered with irrigation, coverage as it needs to be. And with that information, we've at least got all of our pumping requirements, our main line sizes, our general quantities of materials identified so that contractors can order that material.
Okay.
But then it goes to construction, and that almost in some situations is thrown out the window. And so the contractor will start shaping the green, or a hole, right? A green, a bunker, a tee. And typically I like to have them get at least 3 holes done, shaped in, and then we'll come out and we'll GPS all of the as-built features. And the architect will, with flags or paint, mark the
center lines,
desired, the desired turf lines.
Okay.
So the edge rough, maybe the fairway. So they'll flag that. We'll pick that up with the GPS, and then we go redesign the system. Now, from the initial design, at least we have the mainline size accounted for through that golf hole.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's an entirely new layout. And
so the engineering side of you would prefer the not core Crenshaw method, something that's a little more concrete that doesn't matter?
No, it doesn't matter. I think as long as turf areas don't change drastically.
Sure.
And if they don't change from, 30 acres here and 50 acres here and then, switch.
Right.
That's fine. It's no big deal.
Okay.
I actually appreciate the looseness of some of their work, like the core Crenshaw guys.
Right.
They do their work in the field.
Yeah.
And they're damn good at it, right? I'm not going to question how they do it. I'm going to accommodate however it needs to get done. But
okay.
Even on a well-engineered set of plans, there's going to be changes in the field. So does it really matter? It doesn't matter that much.
Sure. So if you've got a routing plan from the architect, but you're waiting until rough grading's done, there's got to be some times in the process where you're under the gun big time to get things, because I wouldn't imagine they want to have that ground sitting open for very long before they've got irrigation and seed going down, right?
No, absolutely not. I mean, it's a quick turnaround. So an architect, so we just built Shorties at Bandon.
Okay.
This new little par 3.
Yep.
It's right next to the preserve. If you get a chance to go see it, it's pretty neat.
Okay.
A little bit more extreme terrain than what the preserve is. It was really windy during construction on that job site. And
which may help you, right? Because you can kind of design for that, I would assume.
That comes up a lot. I don't take, at least at Bandon Dunes, the wind changes quite a bit. In one season, it's kind of coming from the north. And then
sure.
6 months later, it's kind of coming from the south.
Okay.
And so you can't design for one specific wind. You just got to design a tight system, right?
I was going to ask. So then, does that mean your spacing and things like that change to accommodate the shifting weather patterns?
Yeah, we'll get tighter spacing to minimize
how tight?
Those egg shape. It's 60 feet is probably tight enough up there. I mean, down south, I've seen systems at 55 feet even.
Yeah.
There's actually a lot of Bandon Dunes it's even 65 feet. So
okay.
I think as long as you got good triangulated spacing, they're pretty good at managing around that. And they're irrigating at night.
Sure.
Wind dies down quite a bit. And, with the sensors that we have out there, they can manage around that. They can shut the system off if it gets too windy.
Yeah.
But the critical thing at Shorty's was the architect would shape all the features, and the next day they'd be wind blown out if the irrigation wasn't in place.
Right.
So we had to get out there, and it's pretty typical. It's a 2-day process for us. We'll visit the job site, GPS all of the shaped features, redesign the irrigation system that night in the hotel room, and stake it the very next day, and the contractor's putting it in starting the next day.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So I would imagine I would imagine you got systems in place that you can, obviously you can do it that quickly, but that, man, I never even thought about the turnaround time on some of that stuff.
Yeah, well, yes, it's slower than that too, and that in general, a contractor builds or installs irrigation on about one hole a week,
Right.
on average, right? So they don't just get in there and they don't install it the very next day. It's a
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
But as they're building it, they can at least turn irrigation on to start holding those shapes in place.
Right.
We had similar issues at Gamble Sands this year, building another 18-hole course at Gamble Sands and windy sand environment.
Right.
Um,
Who did Shorty's, architect wise?
so they're ex-Core Crenshaw, maybe even current, I'm not sure, associates. That's
Okay.
WAC Design Group.
Okay.
So Whitman, Axlin, Cutton.
Got it.
All Core Crenshaw associates, same vision as Core Crenshaw, just a
I'll
different
have to
group.
get out and see it. As you know, it's not a place you just kind of pop into, nor is Gamble Sands, but they're both worth the trip though, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah. It's, if you build it, they will come.
Yeah,
Is what they are.
exactly right.
Yeah.
So an oft asked question in the industry is your role or the architect's role, since you work so closely with them, in recommending specific brands of components. Do you do
Right.
that?
Uh,
Or do you leave that
yes
up
and
to
no.
the superintendent, or
A
how
little
does
of
it work?
everything. So I mean, there's a lot of factors, right? There's what is the superintendent comfortable with and familiar with?
Sure.
Um, in a lot of situations, and we're working on job sites that still have, this is limited now, but hydraulic systems,
Right.
right? With no central control. So they're
Yeah.
not familiar with anything.
Yeah.
And then it really kind of comes down to, in that situation, who has the better service is kind of the direction we'll lean towards. Is it Rambert or is it Toro?
Yep.
And a lot of times we'll set up interviews with each distributor and manufacturer, to interview with the club and superintendent. They can make their sales pitch. If they're still like on the fence of what they like, what they prefer,
Yeah.
we'll go that route, and that
And
might help us make some decisions.
so would you be the moderator, so to speak, in that situation?
Yeah, yeah, we'll guide and direct the
Okay.
meeting. Yeah.
Likewise with contractors?
Yes, with contractors. So when we bid projects, if it's a municipal project, well, in either situation, we have a tight spec where the contractor has to have, a certain amount of experience and a
Sure.
number of courses that they built in similar or greater scope. So that limits who can bid a municipal project, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
In a private property like a country club, then we send the invite out to qualified bidders. There's 5 or 6, 7 qualified golf irrigation contractors
Yeah.
working in the West regularly. There's more than that through the country, but
Sure. So
we will invite those contractors out to the property, and this is in either public or private. In a private setting, we may do interviews one-on-one.
right.
It's a longer process, obviously.
Yeah.
Or we may have it all in one meeting, tour the site all together, which is like what we would do in a municipal setting. They all get their chances to ask their questions, and they have a week, 2 weeks to go back to their office, dive into the project, email me questions, and we respond back in writing so everybody has the same information.
Right. Okay. Okay. And I suppose it depends on whether, is it a renovation? Is it just the irrigation system? Is it a total course overhaul? And, all of that
Yeah,
stuff I'm sure plays into it.
if it involves golf work, construction work, then we're doing that in concert with the
Yep.
golf architect.
Yep.
All
And
in one meeting though.
and what region do you cover as a company?
Yeah, primarily in the Northwest,
Okay.
but I've worked in years ago. Dave Beck had connections across the country. I've done work in Michigan, Ohio,
Okay.
but most of the work is in the Northwest.
Got it.
I've got some opportunities in Texas that may come to fruition, and so we're not opposed to branching out and spreading our wings, but
Sure.
it's just it's not what you know almost, but it's who you know. And we
All
got
right.
a lot of
Yeah.
connections in the Northwest.
Yeah. Let's get down to some granular stuff as far as, I mean, there's been a big swing in your world in components from PVC to HDPE because of cost. I actually never thought I'd see that big a swing, but do you think is that going to stay constant now?
I don't really see it changing back.
What are the
But who
advantages?
knows? I mean, with HDPE, you don't have all the ductile iron fittings,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's a truly monolithic system,
Right.
assuming you go full HDPE. You could go hybrid too. You know, this new Shorty's project at Bandon Dunes, the contractor wasn't experienced or comfortable with HDPE yet.
Hmm.
So we went with HDPE laterals, but we stuck with PVC main lines. And
Really? I would
through
think
the
it'd be the other way around.
no, because the fusion equipment for larger pipe is more expensive. It's a little
Right.
bit more
Okay.
intricate to
Okay.
weld that stuff together.
Yeah. Yeah. That
And
makes
the
sense.
laterals, you know, the HDPE 2-inch pipe comes on 2,000-foot rolls.
Right.
And so there's no gluing of the 2-inch pipe, no
Yeah.
welding of the glue, really no. There's welding to the lateral valve, and there's a way to weld the saddle for your swing joint service onto the pipe, but it's one long stick of pipe, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. If you're gonna have some PVC to do a PVC main line, I think,
Yeah.
in HDPE
Okay.
laterals, but I don't know. Every job site is unique.
Right.
Um, but with HDPE, I mean, if you got good water quality, they have poly gate valves, ball valves now.
Oh, really?
And they have, I say now, but you
Yeah.
know, they've got poly valves that again reduces the metal mechanical components,
Right.
which you know wear and rust and
Oh,
corrode and
yeah.
fail.
Yeah. We know that.
So I don't know that I see it going back. It would have to be a pretty extreme event.
Yeah.
It's kind of
So
like two wires is
that's a
finally
good point.
gaining popularity,
Right.
right?
Right. That's
And
a
it's
good
been
point.
around for a while, but once you have two wire, I don't know that anybody says, "Oh, I can't wait to go back to a satellite system."
You know, a dumb one that we were just talking about in our conference call. We have a weekly conference call with our team. This year, we're not bringing hardly any paper brochure type stuff to the show. We're only bringing a single page with a QR code in the middle. Well,
Yeah,
QR codes have been around forever, but it's
right.
so funny how now all of a sudden they've gained incredible traction again.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just funny how certain things have a cyclical sort of nature to them. And yeah, I would agree. I think HDP overall and the longevity of it has got to be a
Well, that's
lot
the other thing. With
better.
HDPE, you get a 25-year warranty if you got the
Right.
qualified installer. Every job. So we get a construction crew that just came off of, you know, another golf project. They're coming onto our job. Their other project, they just got done installing HDPE. We still, and this is not just me, this is really all the consultants, still require that contractor, their employees to be certified in welding HDPE on the job site, even though they know how to do it. But a big benefit to that is training the superintendent and the irrigation tech
Yeah.
and their staff on welding pipe. And it just
Right.
kind of sets a precedence on the way things need to be done for the
Yeah.
job for it to be successful.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about HDPE too is when a weld is done, whether it's a butt fusion or a socket weld, you can see right away if it's a good joint, a good welded joint. With a glued PVC system connection, you can't see, right?
Yeah.
If it's been primed in some
Right.
situations,
Right.
if the glue's stuck, you know, so there are
I I
a lot of
remember
benefits to HDPE.
without implicating anybody, I remember having a system overhauled, and 2.5 years after the system was installed, we had a failure on a lateral, on a green lateral. Dug it up. It had only been primed, no solvent weld on. But it lasted 2.5 years. To the installer's credit, they had backfilled and compacted so well
Yeah,
that
yeah.
it held it in place. But and there was another one we couldn't get pressure. Thankfully, the system was looped. We couldn't get pressure to a head. found out that there was somebody during the same installer, same project, had stuffed a rag in the line for whatever
Yeah.
reason. And then the rag was still in the line. It was up in the swing joint by that time. So it's so
Yeah.
funny how things take a long time to figure out, that there was a problem.
Yeah. Seen a lot of
Okay,
that.
so let's get into existing systems. I mean, obviously you're not doing all new installations. You're doing some renovation and maybe some tweaking. I mean, the numbers I'm hearing now for a complete system overhaul are staggering. You know, I
Yeah.
there's one in the Southwest that's going on right now that was $6.5 million.
Yeah.
Um, and I think for guys that have been in the industry a long time, you get a number stuck in your head. It's kind of like when you tell a member that it's going to cost $50, and all of a sudden, for whatever reason, it goes to 75, and that number $50 is stuck in his head forever. But
Yeah.
what are the top tips that you could give a turf manager as far as fine tuning the system he's got? I mean, what's the best bang for the buck?
Well, for them to audit their system,
Okay,
which
good. Yeah.
I don't see a lot of that.
Right.
A lot of benefit. Irrigation systems in the Northwest specifically generally last 30 years in a lot of situations or a lot
Yeah.
of cases because the price of the systems,
Right.
40 years even, and longer. But as a rule of thumb, we say 30-year lifespan on irrigation system. And over that time, sprinkler heads have been added.
Yep.
Nozzles have been changed.
Yep.
Sprinklers have been swapped out. And, the sales guy brought in a case of sprinklers for them to try on a green and
Yeah.
different nozzle. And it never was updated in the central control database if they have one.
Right.
So, audit your system, identify every head, make, model, the nozzle, check your pressure at the nozzle to make sure you have adequate pressure. Look at your sprinkler runtime or rotation speeds. That's a big one that's overlooked a lot. The faster the sprinkler turns, the less throw you get out of it.
Now, do you assist on stuff like that, or is that
We have.
something that you have?
We have. Don't have a lot of time to do that
Right.
right now. We've got so
Right.
much design work.
What are some
So
good
we offer
resources
direction.
for that kind of thing? I mean, can you point people to a good resource? Because I mean, that sounds like a daunting task for somebody that, maybe they've been on the same course for 20 years. They know you're
Yeah.
right, but they haven't really addressed the issue a whole lot in the last 20 years. But I mean, I can totally. So what are there some good resources to really kind of get a punch list together for yourself?
Well, yeah, we can put together a spreadsheet. We have a spreadsheet that
Oh,
we
you do?
can provide them hole by hole. It's set
Okay.
up so they just enter the data.
Got it.
So, we can assist them through that process and then update the database for them if they're not comfortable with it, or
Right.
walk them through that, give them their hands-on experience and
Yeah.
in taking that under their own belt. Yeah, it's easy for us to update those databases if we have the data.
Sure.
But currently, it takes a lot of time to go out and turn on every sprinkler head and
Yep.
identify all of those components
Yep.
to really get it dialed in.
I'm embarrassed to admit that I had an irrigation tech in Arizona that I'll only say his initials because that's how we identified it in the database, but his initials were BG. And so he would take, this was 25, 30 years ago. So the systems were a little bit different and nozzling was different, but he had one of those little old hand drills that your grandpa had.
Oh yeah.
And he would drill a hole in the side of an old 91 DR Impact, to spray a little bit more around the sprinkler head. And so when we discovered those, we had to add something, and so we would just make up
A flow.
a flow, and we just put BG next to it because we knew that it had been adjusted by him. And but yeah, you're right that the system morphs just organically. It just morphs over time. And
I've seen so many times where you're adding sprinkler heads one more row out to the turf edge, right?
Yeah.
And I've seen 6 valve and head rotors on one wire before.
Right.
I don't even know how it's turning all those on, let alone having enough flow.
Yeah, and the answer is you probably don't.
You don't. And the system's running at night,
right?
So you don't see it.
Yeah.
Another way for a superintendent to audit the system is do a catch can test.
Yeah.
To verify your precipitation rates and your
Yeah.
distribution uniformity and make your scheduling adjustments.
Yep. That's great.
Based on that. A single head control too is huge bang for their buck to get the system dialed in.
So assuming, and this is a big assumption, assuming that the spacing is somewhat adequate, do you feel like that's a good investment to make a wiring change so that you've got single head control?
Yeah, so I always tell our clients that if you're gonna make that change, because installing wire, if you're updating your communication, assuming you may even be pulling new wire to satellites, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Ideally, I like to see a system last at least another 7 years to 10 years
To justify
in order to
it.
capture that investment.
Okay.
Because I can't stress enough, and all my clients, you got to treat it as an investment. Do it right.
Yeah.
Do it right once, and you'll maximize your investment on it. If you cut corners, it's going to cost you big time.
Yeah,
You're not
and
going to get your return on investment.
well, and ROI it's a tricky one in the Northwest because as a rule, and it's not a hard rule, but as a rule, water and electricity are probably the cheapest in the nation in the Northwest.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'll take my time at Coeur d'Alene as an example. That system is woefully out of date. It's pushing 40 years old now, and it's been cobbled together, and things have been done. But like any project, you make it work, and the superintendents are their own worst enemy when it comes to, not allowing a system to fail, making it a much harder sale
Right.
to the decision makers. But besides the basics of, I go to a Southwest customer and they're willing to make that $5 million investment in a renovation because between pumping and water costs, if they can save, I mean, I've got some that'll save, $300,000-$400,000 a year just in being able to water within a window that's
Yeah.
off peak or something like that. So, since you're kind of focused on Northwest, where else can that ROI be captured? Because that's a big deal.
Yeah, labor is a big part, right? Labor is
Yep.
getting more and more expensive all the time.
Okay.
And trying to pull staff away or hire extra staff
Yeah.
to syringe greens or hot spots
Yeah. Good
or
point.
make improvements, it becomes, as the system ages, it becomes a daily task.
Absolutely.
So, labor is a big one as far as financial
Yeah.
return on investment there. But playability, what do you want your property to be? How are you going to attract new clients, new golfers?
Right.
It's by improving the property itself.
Yeah.
So a new system is going to provide better playability, more uniformity, single head control, tighter spacing, can better manage all those little microclimates and soil types. And
Yeah.
Not new necessarily, but new in the sense of what you'd get with the new irrigation system versus the old irrigation system is, surrounds heads around the greens is ever, so popular. It's almost a requirement nowadays.
Absolutely.
So I think those are probably the two biggest arguments for replacing an irrigation system, specifically where water and power is dirt cheap.
Yeah. Those are good points. Absolutely. Let's talk about technology. So what do you see incorporated now on an install that you didn't see 5 or 10 years ago? And what things down the road do you think are going to become much more commonly integrated with new systems?
Yeah, technology, it feels like it's kind of on a slow burn the last 5 or 10 years. For a while it was, oh, we're bringing in the 2-wire, the decoders,
Right.
That was all the big talk. And there's a lot of benefits to that I think, opportunities that are still coming. But I can't say HDPE is kind of a newer somewhat of a newer tech. I'd say newer in the last 10, 15 years. But like new, I can't really point to anything new that I think is, just worth seeing. Back in the days, it was always fun to go to the GIS show
Yeah.
to see the new latest and greatest products that are
Right.
coming out. And how often do you see new latest and greatest products at the manufacturers' booths anymore? It's not very often. You know, they're making updates to the central control systems, right?
Yep.
Minor updates to maybe a nozzle on a existing sprinkler head, or maybe they're changing their sprinkler head model a little bit um, to encompass a wider range of uh, flow characteristic, pressure
Yeah.
characteristics,
So, okay.
stuff
So,
like that.
so let me drill down a little bit. Maybe I didn't define the question quite as I had intended, but I'm seeing things like sensors. And so these are maybe third party sort of entries into the game. You've got
Yeah,
moisture sensors, you've got, what Jerry and Jamie are doing with TerraRad, incorporating it in. But
right.
the challenge with any of these that we've always faced is the integration into the controls, right? I mean, there's some great sensing technology. There's some great ground sensing technology. I mean, take even like a TDR 350 or a Pogo type of sensor. Those are all
Yeah,
great tools, but it seems like there's an impasse between gathering the data and actually implementing the changes in the system. Um,
yeah.
so, of what's available as far as that, let's call it sensing technology. Are you seeing any trends that are being more widely adopted? And again, I think it has to do with ROI, and
Yeah.
where you can really show savings.
And so I guess to continue where I was going with what I was saying earlier was sensing technology. It's been there for a while. You know,
Right.
Toro's had that wireless turf sensor out for probably 10 years,
Yeah, at least.
you know, at least maybe
Yeah.
more. So that technology's been there. What I have seen lately, obviously drones,
Yep.
and getting thermal imagery, LiDAR, type information with the drones. You can kind of see where you might have disease on the golf course.
Sure.
You can pick up bad coverage areas from, sprinkler, but those are things that you identify on the ground. Hillcrest Country Club, we renovated the back nine over there a
Yep.
couple of years ago.
Yep.
Was working with an outfit, a third party outfit that wanted all of our as built and mapping information, so that they could overlay so they're putting moisture sensors on the back of a mower,
Yeah.
or some equipment that drives across the property
Yep.
regularly and frequently, right?
Yep.
And they're bringing that into our mapping, so that then the superintendent, much like an aerial drone, but you're actually getting in the ground data. And they're using that information as far as incorporating that and then making live, real time adjustments in the control system. I haven't seen that happen yet. The technology's there.
Yeah.
I think a part of it is old school, new school. I think it's going to take more push from younger and younger superintendents
Yeah.
that want to rely on that technology.
Well,
You get the older guys, and
I'm an
you're
older guy.
techie. You're a techie guy though too, but
Yeah.
a lot of guys from your generation of superintendent, they don't want their hands on.
Right.
They don't want to allow some device to make a change automatically without them
Yeah.
okaying it.
I don't disagree with you, Greg, but the thing that I identified real quickly, and I'll use the Spectrum Technologies TDR as an example, because that just
Yeah.
happened to be the one that I use more often. But the thing that it showed me right away is I learned from a field guy. The superintendent I work for out of school, I learned from him. It was a touch thing. But as the generations shifted, it was it wasn't as relatable to to pass on that touch or feel, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
so the number that was generated from the sensor, I could I could equate that or calibrate it to a feel, and it was much more easily transferred to a younger guy who, he knew if it turned purple, he didn't know that it was time to water, but if it was 10%, now it's
Right.
time to water, right? And
Right.
but the integration thing, it seems like the stumbling block right now is just proprietary with these manufacturers, and if they can't own it, they won't integrate it. And maybe unfairly throwing rocks at the irrigation industry, but it seems like
No,
that's a stumbling block that we've got to figure out how to get through or over,
yeah,
so
and
that these tools can be utilized.
it's not just with, in this case, turf conditions, but pump stations too.
Yeah,
Why can't any manufacturer of a control system take any pressure and flow data from another manufacturer's pump station and
right,
integrate that?
right.
I mean, it just drives me nuts
Or
that
the
they
pump
use that as a
station to the
sales
control
pitch to
system.
get, yeah, either way, right? I
Yeah,
mean, I don't know why they can't just agree to share the data and use it
yeah.
the way it needs to be used. It
Well, maybe
drives
you're
me nuts.
right. Maybe it has to come from the field and just demand it. Um,
I think so. And again, I think the new generation of people coming into the industry will drive that.
yeah, I agree. Hear that, everybody? Everybody under the age of 40, you got to start pushing that stuff a little bit harder. Um, so I do a lot of work in the Southwest, and water, not only water quantity, but water quality is a huge concern.
Hmm.
Probably not so much where you do the bulk of your work, but do you take water quality into consideration when you're doing a design?
Oh yeah, you have to.
You have to. How
Um,
so?
well, specifically filtration, I think is
Filtration.
important, right?
Yeah.
Filters are expensive. Do you
Yep.
need them? Or do you have drip irrigation out in the field, or are you just golf rotors?
Right.
Large, something that's going to pass a 300 micron, or do you need to filter down to 100 micron or less?
Yeah.
So filtration's a big one, and whether that filtration is on the pump station or at the electric valve, you
Do you
know.
get into water treatment per se, like irrigation water treatment? And I'm not talking like a water treatment facility, but more, injectables and things like that. Do you design those systems as well?
So we can design for those. I'm
Okay.
not the professional with
Okay.
the, the chemistry of water. I rely on other folks for that information.
But the hardware
Take what,
you'll do.
take that information and we can incorporate
Okay.
how to address those challenges, right?
Right.
And as far, then you got reclaimed water, obviously, that's getting more and more popular.
Yeah.
It's standard in the Southwest, right?
Right. That's
More and
right.
more popular as we get further north, and depending on what that water quality is, may drive different metals to be used on the property. But
Sure.
a lot of agencies, or not agencies, municipalities require for valve boxes or valves or pipe to be tagged purple.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, but like you said, the construction components too could be a consideration if it's caustic or, high salt, where you're
yeah,
wearing out components quicker.
yeah.
Um, I'm gonna bounce around a little bit because I'm thinking about this right now. I've seen this more in the last couple of years, and I don't know what the push is, but where clubs or superintendents are buying the components for a renovation
Mm.
versus the contractor supplying it. Why are those decisions being made?
It's cost driven, and
Okay.
it's a bad decision
Okay.
in my
It seems
experience.
it seems like it to me, but I wanted your opinion on it.
Yeah,
Why do you
well,
say that?
I've had a bad experience with it a couple times. The one of note, we were doing a job in kind of the middle of nowhere, central Washington,
Okay.
and it was coming out of the recession, the Great Recession.
Right.
Before the Great Recession, distributors had all kinds of product on their shelves. And if a contractor needed something, grab it off the shelf, it'd get to the job site quickly.
Yep.
Well, through the Great Recession, distributors were at risk holding all that material on their shelves, and so they would order it as they needed it.
Right.
And then drop shipping became very popular. Um, and so we kind of got hit right at the time where nobody was wanting to supply any material or hold materials on the shelves. And if we needed product on the job site, it would have to be ordered direct from the manufacturer. And then
Mm-hmm.
there was a lag time in getting it to the distributor and then out to the job site. And so on this situation, the owner wanted to save money. They insisted on buying the materials. Um, we had all we had all the meetings up front that one could ask for, right? In coordinating all of these efforts, from the owner buying the materials, getting it delivered to the site, working with the contractor on inventorying the materials, trying to stay in front of the next hole that they're going to be on to make sure that they have everything that they need.
Yeah.
And they didn't do that, and it fell
It's
apart. And then we got into a situation where we needed a valve or a fitting, and it would take minimum 3 days to
right.
get that on the job site.
Yeah.
Well, now there's more housing.
There
It
goes your
delays the
savings.
project time. Where if the contractor was responsible for materials,
Yeah.
that all would have been handled.
Yeah. There goes your
Right?
savings with equipment idling and people standing around
Savings and
waiting for some.
scheduling. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, you don't want your course under construction for any longer than it needs to be.
Right. I did hear of one good example, and I don't think it made it any easier on the superintendent.
No.
But of course, I was working with in California had purchased all their own equipment, all their own hardware components. But because of the timing, and this was post COVID, because of the timing and supply chain issues, he knew if he could get the bulk of it in-house, he ended up saving almost $1.3 million on the components by bringing them in almost a year ahead of time because he could see what was going on.
Yeah.
You know, that's significant enough. It's justifiable, but I can't imagine putting that burden on a superintendent who's already got 50 hats in the air. You know, now you're in charge of keeping count of all the valves so that the contractor is moving at a pace that you're supposed to be moving at.
Yeah, I mean, there could be a hybrid situation, kind of like what you're talking about,
Sure.
that may work, right? With so the environment right now is contractors are bidding at least a year out before they can mobilize onto a job site.
Right.
But yet pipe specifically, sometimes wire, sometimes manufactured branded products like Toro's, Rainbirds, they're going to have pipe changes price or was changing price daily for a while. Then it was weekly,
right?
Stabilized to some degree, but they're only holding bids for a week at a time.
Similar in the fertilizer side. Very similar.
So to lock in the price, you have to award the contract and or buy that pipe, you know, right away. And the challenge there is that the pipe manufacturers, when you order that product, they're making it and they're delivering it. They're not sitting on it and waiting a year until the contractor can get on site to then ship it. And so in that situation where you're going to be waiting anyways, you have to order the product. It's got to be delivered. It's going to be sitting on site. I could see a club maybe securing the pipe independently, but I would never recommend that they buy all the sprinkler heads, the valves, the fittings, all the little nuts and bolts. No, that's way too difficult to manage.
Yeah, that's a really
too many line items.
Yeah, the hybrid I think makes a little bit more sense, even if you just brought the main lines in to be able to be prepared for the start of the project.
Prepared, lock in your price. Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about technology earlier, and I wanted to ask you: are there tricks or techniques that you'll insist on? I remember working with a contractor one time, and it took some salesmanship on the contractor's part to sell the designer. Of course, he was a fairly immovable object to begin with, but no longer in the business. You could probably guess who it was. But this particular contractor had started to put the pedestals on a jumbo valve box so that you could basically tip the whole thing over and service it. I don't know how many times I ended up doing that, but you know, it made it nice for breakaways if we ever had somebody drive across the golf course, a little less damage. I mean, are there things like that you would say, boy, I've seen this done several times. I would highly recommend doing it, whatever the technique might be.
Oh yeah. You know, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I mean, I've seen when the valve box, the satellite on the valve box thing became popular, then the manufacturers started making a valve box specifically for that was hinged. And
so that didn't go away, is what you're saying.
I still see, well, what's gone away is satellites.
That's true.
Rarely am seeing satellite systems anymore. Only in the case where I'm trying to think. I've only done, I want to say 3 satellite systems in the last 5 years.
So is it more decoder or more 2-wire?
Those are kind of both the same, right?
Yeah, I guess they
Rainbird will insist it's not a decoder, it's an IC module. But for the sake of our conversation, it's a decoder. You got the controls and the solenoid in one device.
Yeah.
Let's turn the sprinkler head. So you don't see satellites on the field, right? And
Right.
Toro's got the decoder system too, and Hunter has one. And those are, more and more popular these days. Only in the case where we've done satellite systems, it's because they have the property has bought satellites, maybe up to 5 years ago, and they want to
Sure.
reuse them.
Yeah. Okay.
But I can't think of any cool new gadgets or tricks to make the system more user friendly for you.
That's
I
fine.
can't think of anything right now. I did see, so we're doing a job in Wyoming, and it's a golf course, baseball fields, and a park, all one. It's a municipality.
Okay.
And they had installed a big jumbo valve box with one of those little retractable hoses
Oh yeah.
and the nozzle
Yep.
down in these key areas. So it's real easy for them to do. They didn't have to drag a hose everywhere. It was all right there.
Yeah.
You could just open up the valve box lid, pull that out, and spray it, syringe wherever they need to syringe in
We
the
had
area.
we had one of those on a floating green that I managed at one point in time because it just got to be such a pain in the butt. But we installed a rubber 1-inch hose, so it made it just as hard as if you were dragging hose off the
Oh yeah.
off the barge. So,
How big a vault did it take to store a 1-inch hose?
well, we've got a giant
Was it
plenum
down in
underneath the green. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. So, but
yeah.
we're not going to talk about that. I had a couple things, but I just looked at the clock and I realized we're almost at an hour already. I want to talk real quick about, it seems like one of the things that we miss a lot as far as getting back to conservation is pond systems and lining and things like that. Do you get into that, or is that more the engineering side of things?
We get into it a little bit. Yeah,
It just
we'll design the ponds in some situations.
seems like that's an opportunity for conservation that's maybe missed sometimes. Would you agree with that?
I mean, we come across either old ponds that have liners that are failing,
Yeah,
or um, maybe they're lined with clay and bentonite.
yeah,
And, a lot of times you get either golfers stepping into the pond and damaging the liner itself, or penetrating through um, your impermeable layer, bentonite clay layer or something like
yeah,
that, which you get or deer stepping in there or something like that.
sure.
Um, so yeah, older ponds for sure, you get a lot of loss, and it's usually within the top, couple feet where people
Right.
might be stepping in and damaging that liner. I don't see a lot of failure on ponds deep unless a boot maybe has failed on a pipe that's penetrating.
Yep.
But it's usually easy to identify because the pond will drop down to a certain level, and that kind of narrows down where the leak is.
Yeah.
You start to find it. I saw maybe 5 years ago, California was dumping a bunch of HDPE balls over their lake to
Yeah.
minimize evaporation.
Yeah.
I've seen on smaller pond facilities where people have built like a roof type system
Solar arrays.
over the top of the pond to minimize.
Yeah, there's a company in Southern Cal that's now offering a solar array, basically like a barge that
Oh
goes
yeah,
over the top of a pond, which makes a lot of sense to me. I mean that,
yeah,
you're conserving evaporation while generating energy. That does make some sense to me.
for sure.
I've seen it a couple times in the last couple of years, but it seems like, and maybe it's just my perception, but it seems as though things like drip irrigation around bunkers is becoming a little more popular. And I don't know if that's driven by labor shortage or just playability and consistency, but have you done any of those, and what are your
Yeah,
thoughts?
yeah. No, I think labor shortage, right? Expectations, playability, aesthetics. There's a lot of factors that
Yeah,
leading into why to use them. Especially, south facing bunker, steep slopes, or just mounding, even not even
yeah,
at a bunker face. It makes a lot of sense, right? You can shoot that area with a little bit of water subsurface without disrupting any sort of play
yeah.
in the middle of the day. You can give it just a little shot too to get that top 1 to 2 inches of soil profile and
Yeah, the timing
minimize
that
your runoff.
I didn't really even think about the timing of it aspect of it, but that makes good sense.
The
Yeah.
drip is awesome because it can go off during the day and nobody
Right.
knows, right?
Right.
Another way to do it, we've done it a lot in the past. It's people get nervous, superintendents get nervous with drip irrigation because you can't see it. You
Sure.
don't get confirmation that it's working until all of a sudden it's not. And then stuff starts to brown up, right?
Yeah.
That's usually a drip emitter at a time. It's not system wide where you
Right.
start seeing failures. And so that's pretty easy for somebody to repair. But for the guy that is real visual, and they have to see it every day to know that it's working. We've done MP rotators or those little
Yep.
micro rotor
Yep.
sprays. We've done those too. Those are susceptible. Both are susceptible to, we were talking about water quality earlier, sedimentation,
Right.
or organic matter fouling up either the
Certainly
nozzle or the
damage
drip
too, right?
emitter. Yeah.
Yeah. Mechanical damage.
So you got to have some additional filtration at those electric valves servicing those areas.
Yeah.
But yeah, we do it all the time. It's pretty popular.
Right.
With Hillcrest, they didn't have the money to actually put in the drip irrigation at the time. But when we renovated, we at least put in the electric valve.
Okay.
And then down the road, and they weren't sure with the new coverage,
Yeah.
if those problems would be solved or resolved.
Well, and bunker design maybe plays into that too. And those bunkers in particular don't really have the need of versus like a really steeply caped bunker that you're not going to
Right.
be able to keep water on anyway. That's when the drip, I think, makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. If they're unsure though, we'll at least extend or recommend to extend an electric valve to
Yeah,
the area.
for sure.
So it's real easy for them to just plumb on a drip zone and
or at
install
least
it.
a stub and a wire at the very minimum, right?
Yeah.
Um, biggest miss during construction
As
on
built in.
on the superintendent side,
On
not
the
on the design
superintendent
side.
side?
Yeah. Like
Um,
if you could give one piece of, hey, watch out for this, what would it be that you've seen
oh man,
repeatedly?
there's a lot. Well, so back to superintendent taking on responsibility during construction. Pipe depths can be critical, especially in the Northwest. If the lateral depths start to suffer and they start,
Suffer up.
suffer up,
Right.
it's real critical. And I'm a real stickler with this, that you got your sprinkler head sitting there.
Yeah.
That your swing joint comes off at a positive drainage. If your lateral is too shallow, then your swing joint comes up to your connections. With the HDPE, it's top service off
Right.
the lateral.
Right.
And so that puts your inlet that much higher because it's not off the side like it would be on a PVC system.
Yep.
So if your lateral's too shallow, you get this P trap at the bottom of the head.
Oh,
And
sure.
In our a lot of the Northwest freezing climates, that can become a real weak point.
Yeah.
And laterals on renovations are installed by vibratory plow, and it's hard to see how deep the lateral is except for where they open up wherever sprinkler head is.
Where there's going
so
to be a tap. Sure.
I think it's important for a superintendent to assist with the eyes and just, making sure that we're getting positive drainage on those swing joints. Because that's a long-term issue if that's an issue.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. No, I think quality control in general, if there was one critical assignment that somebody on that staff could be assigned to, it would be QC, right? Just making sure the contractor is doing what he's supposed to be doing out there.
Yeah, I think the biggest corner I see cut that's hard for us to keep an eye on continually is pipe depths.
Yeah. Okay.
Everything else, anything that extends to the surface, we're as building, we're making sure it's in the right location. They're not cutting out any product. It's easy for us to identify.
So do you typically survey after everything's installed as well, like the actual GPS?
Yeah.
So you can see if there were steps skipped.
Yeah, we compare as built to the design. And we specify to ensure uniformity is relayed out into the field as it was designed on paper. Yeah. We specify placement of the sprinkler head within 6 inches of the original and GPS location.
Okay.
And so, we're continually checking that.
See, my last irrigation tech and I always joked, and we call it as drawns versus as built.
Yeah, right.
Because it typically doesn't convert to that in the field, or it's morphed over time, whatever the case may be. So
yeah.
Okay, so at the end, and I don't provide you the questions, and I forgot to write them all down, but I've got some kind of boilerplate questions, but I call it my lightning round just to kind of get some ideas. So you got to, it's just the first thing that pops in your head. So my first standard is beer or wine or other.
Oh man, depends on the day.
Depends on the time of day, probably, right?
Time of day too. Yeah.
Okay.
I
This
like
is
it
going to be a
all.
tough one for you. So, fishing or hunting? Because I know you do a little bit of both.
I do. It years ago, probably hunting, but I'm transitioning to fishing.
Okay.
A little easier on the body.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I
you're a
love
big game
hunting
hunter,
though.
right?
Mostly big game. Yeah, we got a wire hair pointing griffon a couple years ago. She's
Oh,
3 years old
nice.
now. Wanting to get into chucker hunting more. Just,
Yeah.
stuff to help keep me in shape through the off season.
You just talked about moving to fishing because it was easier on your body. Now you're
I
going
know.
chucker hunting? Are you kidding me?
Well, I think it was the chucker hunting that it reinforced fishing as maybe a better idea.
You know, I don't think there's an upland bird that's harder to hunt, but if you've
They're
got a good
brutal.
dog, it totally makes it an enjoyable day just watching the dog.
That's what it is. It's just
Yeah.
it's watching the dog.
I haven't hunted a quail or a pheasant since I lost my hunting dog, and because it's just not fun anymore. It's not the same.
Yeah, you have to have the dog.
Yeah.
No point in going if you don't have a dog.
So you're Boise State grad. Are you a college or pro sport guy?
College,
College. What sport?
football,
Okay. All
football.
right. Boise State?
Yeah, I definitely have a
Okay.
passion for Boise State. But
All right. Cool.
I don't know. When I was a kid, Michigan,
Yeah.
and they just won the national championship. So
Yeah.
that was cool to see.
So you're back to your childhood favorite team now
This year.
at least this year. Fair enough. I won't tell any Broncos that you've jumped ship for a little while. Well, that's all I've got. I really appreciate the time, Greg, and I think this was a good session. I like I told you off air, I focus a little bit more on water and conservation and things like that, and we haven't had anybody on your side of the industry kind of give the insides and the outsides, and I appreciate your insight into kind of what superintendents can look at to tweak the system they've got, and maybe what the first steps are to if they're looking at a renovation, what they need to be looking out for and
Sure.
and asking for, I guess, on the end of it.
Well, I appreciate the invite. It's been fun.
Yeah, no, this was good, and I'm sure I'll see you in the next couple of weeks. You're going to be at GIS in a
I'll
couple
be
of
there.
weeks.
Yeah.
Okay, well, good.
Track you down.
Hopefully
We'll get that
bump into.
beer.
Yeah, well, you come have a beer. Absolutely. Greg Baer with Baer Design Groups. Thanks so much for jumping on, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Kevin. Have a
And
good day.
thanks everybody for listening. And if you haven't subscribed, be sure to do so you get our regular updates.